It's time for Market Explainer, your number one business news podcast. Hosted by Danny and the big man. And it starts right now.
Howdy, y'all. We are back. Let's get into this rundown. We're going to talk about our good friend Brandon Sanderson. Let's go, Brandon. He crowdfunded a stupid amount of money for some sci-fi books. I've never heard of this guy, and it's ridiculous. We're going to get into it. And of course, the big man used to be a manager at Kmart. Once the hallmark of big box retail, Kmart is officially about to die. And it's kind of like, I wish I had the time and the place, like the mode to get out there and go to the last one and be like one of the people who burns it. Is that how that works when they close a Kmart?
No, but I got you.
Oh, I thought it was like the Olympics, like where they pass a torch and,
the torch, that would
and
be
everybody
awesome.
burns it. Okay.
And it would be a blue light, not a torch. But go ahead.
Fine. And fine. Okay. Let's just do it. We're going to talk about inflation. Okay. I'm not going to say it's Joe Biden's fault, but probably is. Okay. And we're going to end off with, of course, the palate cleanser. A hero driverless car drives off after it's pulled over by a cop.
Yet again, Danny finds a non-story story, but we'll get into that later.
All right. So this first one, our good friend, let's go, Brandon Sanderson.
No.
So here's what happened.
Brandon
we have a little
Sanderson.
Correct. We have a little pre-show dialogue, and I just said, let's go, Brandon Sanderson. And the big man had a problem with that, so now I have to do it. And this is after the big man was like, I'm not feeling good today. Can we do this tomorrow? So now I'm kicking him when he's down. So,
Danny's anarchist, you know
yes.
what I mean? You know, side just kind of.
I can't help it. So this dude, and the big man has a lot of thoughts here, and I had to stop him and say, we're gonna talk about this on the show.
Mm-hmm.
The greatest Kickstarter campaign to raise money ever was the Pebble smartwatch. It was the e-paper, like it went out of business already. And that was a decade ago. And this guy shows up and says, I'm going to write, he's going to launch a book a quarter starting next year.
Right.
Here's why I love the story about this author. I'm not an anti-sci-fi guy. You don't think it's like, oh, it's nerdy, you're idiots. That's not it at all. It's just, I love the genre when it's a movie. Okay. So I'm never going to read any of these books. This guy's an author. He's a sci-fi author. The reason I love the story is he thought, I think he gave himself 30 days to raise $1 million. He smoked it in 35 minutes. I think as of today, or as of when I plucked the story, when I curated it, $41 million.
Yeah. As of yesterday, when I checked it, right at like 41.8, 40.8.9.
That is,
like that, yeah.
You know, R.R. Martin, that is J.K. Rowling money. That is silly time banana pants for a fiction author. Now, one of my favorite writers is a guy named Michael Malice. I've never read any of his books because who has the time? But he was doing one of those Q&As. He's giving advice, and someone's like, I really want to write a sci-fi book. And he's like, listen, fiction is a nearly impossible genre to bounce in, to really like have success in.
Right.
And this is a guy who has multiple bestsellers. And so he's like, nonfiction is really where you're going to make the money. So with that piece of knowledge from a best-selling author, to see this guy who I've never heard of, whose books I will never read, who, listen, one of my girlfriends at some point in time will be like, hey, puppy, I want to go see the new movie, Sanderson book. They all talk like that. So it's not racist. I have a type. We all do.
I have no
thoughts
opinion on what just happened.
I know. So I just say, like, this guy, $41 million. Okay. Let me tell you something. I will go do ayahuasca in a forest to come up with a sci-fi concept. And you're giving out $41 million.
Well, but you don't even have to go to, like, here's what I don't, and again, I'm not bagging on Brandon Sanderson here or anything like that. I'm not a huge reader, as you know, as well, but I do like the movies and the comic books and stuff like that. This guy has basically taken RPGs from the 80s and 90s and put them in storybook. When you read, look, I'm not going to go into the details.
What's an RPG?
Role-playing games.
Okay,
like,
yeah, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
D&D kind of stuff, but on like PlayStation and you know what I mean?
I thought you meant rocket-propelled grenade. Because that's where my head's at. Yeah.
Yes. No. Role-playing games back in the day had to have a story. That's one of the... They won awards. Like, role-playing games, video games, have won awards for storytelling for decades. Because for a really good RPG...
Yeah, but every real estate office in this country has the... Oh, we're the Ford Diamond Award. Everyone wins an award.
No. I'm talking about for storytelling, like... books, whatever awards that actual books get.
Right.
Back in the day, role-playing games were getting the same awards because that's the more in-depth the story was, the world that you were playing in was, the better the RPG and the more it got played. There are still versions of those games. Final Fantasy VII came out 20-something years ago, is still considered one of the best video games ever made, even beside the ones that are today. Right? In playing time, right?
Yeah. So, and my favorite, of course, is Mortal Kombat, but that's just me.
But even Mortal Kombat, they've made into a universe, right? They've made a couple of movies. None of them have been great. But again, they once they create a world that people enjoy, and that's what this guy did. He took what I think is actually a Final Fantasy idea.
Knockoff.
Right? It's a Marvel Universe knockoff. It's a, whatever, right? It's the Infinity Stones, right?
Yeah,
Remember the Infinity Stones from Marvel, right?
No, what's that?
And it doesn't
Are you
matter.
spoiling it? I've never seen any of the Marvel movies. I'm a DC guy.
Matter. The point is you've got one big power that's broken up into a bunch of different powers.
Yep.
Those powers are never to be combined again. And the stories of these different pieces create a world, right? There's a piece that's all about bravery. There's a piece that's all about, honor.
In Power Rangers, it was the Zeo crystals.
Power Rangers is a great example, right? The Zeo crystals give each one unique powers, but makes them all more powerful. Right?
Yeah, whatever it was,
Right. So Danny's a big Power Rangers fan. If you didn't know, he made me go see the newest Power Rangers movie when it came out.
2017. That's when that was a bajillion years ago.
But so this guy created a world that then has taken on, right? That people have gotten into. So,
again,
go ahead.
This podcast, while we're a business news podcast, which we are, this is as much as it's about business news, this is about unique and quirky entrepreneurship that no one is thinking about. And
100%.
This is all about, and we just in our pre-show we're talking about, hey, we're not finding the traction we're looking for. Am I picking are these stories too niche? Are they too quirky? I'm like, hey, this guy just raised $41 million to write books about unicorns and wizards. I can't just sit on that and go, let's talk about Elon Musk trying to buy Twitter for $54 billion. I can't just, there's some guy right now, this guy in the very recent past knows the smell of his aunt's basement because he lived in it. Okay. And now he has $41 million. You know what you can do with $41 million?
And still looks like he lives in his grandmother's, in his mom's basement. Like,
yeah, no, he looks like he could fit into our show very well. Okay.
Yeah, well, but speaking of show, I went back in researching in this. I went back and watched a bunch of his YouTube stuff and kind of went through his YouTube channel and stuff like that. And the guy obviously is a successful epic novelist, right? Author and that kind of stuff. I mean, he's created the Cosmere universe, but really you can see on his channel, go to his channel, up until about 6, 7, 8 months ago, it was a lot of, hey, I just want to do something. I'm bored, right? So I'm going to do movie reviews. I'm going to talk about some stuff with obviously a buddy of his.
Would you classify his content up until a few months ago as neckbeard content?
Non-business related.
As a neckbeard,
I'm not as a neckbeard. You jackal. Anyway, you're a jackwagon, and we all know it. So here's the deal. So up until about 6 or 7 months ago, it was just normal, hey, I'm bored and I've got a name and a following, right?
Yeah.
Kind of stuff. And then it's like the guy flipped out overnight and thought, like, had a dream one night going, hey, if I make it, they will come. If I make these books, people will buy them. And his content literally overnight turned into, I'm going to have 4 books come out next year, but I'm not doing it the traditional way. I'm doing it Super Troopers 2 did this, right? Like they went to Kickstarter and said, hey, we'll make another movie, but only if we can pay for it ourselves. That way we don't have to share the revenue with the studio. We'll do whatever we want when we want to do it, right? Whatever. And everybody loves to go up against the bigs, right? Yeah. So this guy comes out, has a following, has a world that he already has created, and says, hey, I'm going to charge you, instead of giving Amazon any money, because you don't want to give Amazon money, you want to give me your money, right? I'm the artist you love, so you don't want to. $40 for the ebook. $40 for the ebook.
I had no idea. It's $40 for the ebook.
$40 for the ebook. Okay?
So he's just going to. So let me just understand.
Yeah.
It's literally just you're paying $40 for a PDF.
Right. Of the book.
Right. So that's. But again, what does Danny always say on Market Explainer? The first lesson of market economics, free market economics, the first lesson, value is subjective. He didn't force anybody. He didn't go to Congress and say, we didn't pass a law that makes everybody buy my book. People gave him money. And
absolutely.
I can't complain. And here's the other thing. Right now on TikTok, there's some blonde-haired, blue-eyed, 22-year-old who's convincing people to pay him $175 a month to join his inside crew to learn how to do Shopify drop shipping. What's worse? Is he? I mean, at least he is delivering a fictional universe, whether it's good or bad is up to the people who are going to read it. Mm-hmm. But at least, I mean, when you put things into the context of $40 for an ebook, like, I've spent more on an ebook and been disappointed, and then had to cancel my credit card because they refused to stop charging.
Well, so I mean, this guy minimum from his followers is getting $40, all the way up to his top tier package is something like $160 for a hardback, you know what I mean, version of it, for an actual book version of it, and and that's not even autographed, right? And then he sends you a bunch of quarterly. You get a bunch of knickknacks, like a bunch of, you know what I mean, swag with the names of these books on them and all this kind of stuff.
And we know people who sell this stuff. Like, hey, would you like to put your logo on a stress ball? And he's going to send you a squeeze bobblehead or whatever the heck. And we already know
but it's going to be like it's going to be like a Warhammer or something, a squeeze Warhammer, or you know what I mean, something. My point is that he's going to create a bunch of cheap swag, right? He's going to sign some things probably once, everybody will probably get a signed whatever in one of the boxes he sends out every quarter, whatever it is. But it's all going to him. He's not sharing this with Amazon. He's not sharing this with some book publisher. He's not sharing this with the whatever. I guarantee it's going to have some grammatical errors, or it's going to have some, you know what I mean? Like, because it's not going to go through the whole process, and people will like it even more because it will feel more like directly authentic. The writer to you, right? But again, you and I've said this before, is this only works if you have an already captivated audience. If he hadn't already created this Cosmere universe, right, of stories, and wasn't well known, and I give you a great example of that. If you go to his YouTube channel, you're going to see kind of his, on a lot of these books, and I think these 4 books coming out, he kind of co-wrote them with another author. She seems very nice. And her name's like Janice, or I'm getting her name mixed up. It doesn't matter. You can go find her very easily. But my point is if you look at her, she's written books for quite a while now, but her books are not as successful as his, right? So if you go to her page, her channel, or whatever, the numbers are way further down. She hasn't already created an audience. She's trying to partner with him to help her books. Her creating audience, right? So you only get to $41 million when you get, again, $41 million. He only had to find 40 people to give him a million people to give him $40 a piece. Right,
but still, and the part of what I want to do with this podcast is showcase things that I'm going to call them dumb. I don't think they're dumb, but I just think, why aren't more people going, I can hack together a universe, right?
But by the way, not a single one of his books have been made a movie or a TV show.
Not yet, but here's the other part of it, right? There are an umpteen number of streaming platforms. You have HBO and Warner. Warner just merged with Discovery. They're going to eventually turn themselves into a single platform. And what's going to happen is there is a thirst for content. And here's the other thing. Hasbro just signed a deal not too long ago with Netflix to release new Power Rangers stuff. Did it tickle me in my no-no place? It sure did. Was I excited?
That's my point. Is only if he's already has this audience without a TV show, without a movie made about it, or whatever.
So 41
those things will just add.
Right. So I'm just saying this guy will have $150 to $200 million in net worth in no time because Amazon because this is the best publicity that you could ever get.
Mm-hmm.
Is Engadget running an article saying Pebble, the smartwatch that went out of business, was beat by a guy, a neckbeard. He doesn't have a neckbeard, but he's culturally a neckbeard, right? Writing books about the sci-fi genre, and it's so big. Hey, here's the other thing. I happen to know a guy who is the main co-host of a talk show in my hometown on the big talk station, who's written a bunch of sci-fi books. Doesn't have this kind of following, right? So I'm fascinated that this guy figured something out.
Well, I think, something you and I are trying to do on this channel, and people have figured out in the last couple of years, especially the direct-to-consumer model, right? But typically after you found a following, this guy can leave Amazon behind, and he kind of makes this about Amazon, like Amazon shouldn't corner the market on books, yada yada.
Yeah, whatever.
It's not believable at all. He could care less.
It's marketing. It's marketing. So it's just, and he's, again, if you go back and watch his YouTube videos since the last 6 months, YouTube video after video after video after video, he must have gotten somebody's like formula or taken a class or whatever, because it's like a video about the upcoming video, and then it's a video about the video that would have been upcoming video, but should have been the next video of when I might release something. And then it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's the whole plan of creating not just urgency but excitement and all that, and then all of a sudden, bam, right, you release what you've been talking about for the last 6 months. Here's what's going to happen. So he didn't just go, hey, I'm going to make this campaign and I'm going to throw it up and kind of advertise a little bit. No, the guy spent the last 5 or 6 months making YouTube videos about he was doing something special, he was doing something different, he riled his audience. We have a huge announcement coming. No,
he riled his audience up.
So there's 2 takeaways for Danny on this one. First of all, I thought crowdfunding was dead. I'm wrong. Crowdfunding still works. And number 2, this kind of tactics and marketing that I feel they're old. Like, we have a big announcement coming. Okay, in 2 weeks we have another announcement, and here's what blah blah blah. It still works.
Yeah,
and it works to the extent that a guy that I've never heard of, right, whose books I'm never going to read. I've heard of George R.R. Martin, okay? I know that whatever his, I'm familiar with the fact that he has Game of Thrones. I've never watched Game of Thrones. I don't have the time or the patience, frankly. I'm not reading the books. I'm not going to watch the show. I hear it's great. But anytime someone who's into it, I always go, oh, what's that? To like piss them off. Like, I've never heard of that. Oh, so it's like it's set like in America and like colonial times, just to piss them off.
Yeah.
But incredible that this is possible. And I'm telling you, Netflix will, I'm going to think it's Netflix or Hulu, because one of them is going to go, hey, we need our own Marvel Cinematic Universe, because Disney already has the MCU.
Right.
HBO already has Game of Thrones, and they're backdating and doing this new series of whatever the heck it's called. And Amazon already has Lord of the Rings, and they're redoing the Lord of the Rings show, whatever. So all of these people already have their universe. Netflix and Hulu need a universe. Looks like these 2 chumps are in line,
I would agree.
So
You got to think that's the next step. And the
of
guy, I
course,
did watch a video of him talking about this specifically, the movies or whatever. There's been a
right,
couple of different studios that have tried, and just it just didn't happen. That happens in
right.
movies a lot of times,
It takes two or
and
three.
TV shows.
It's like knocking over a Coke machine, right? You can't do it in one foul swoop. You got to do it a couple times. It takes a
Well,
couple of knocks at it.
but also sci-fi and fantasy they're expensive, right?
Yes.
I mean, Lord of the Rings was insanely expensive to.
Yes.
I mean, you can make like 5 rom-coms for what it would take for
Right.
one Lord of the Rings movies, right? So they're very expensive to create, and in a new world, it's very if you don't know how the general public are gonna
Receive your.
receive it. There was a movie that came out, I don't know, 15 years ago called The Golden Compass.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of the books. I'd never
Right.
heard of the writer, right? But I went and saw the movie, and I really liked the movie. But the general consensus was people didn't like the movie. They
Yeah.
thought it was boring. So where
Yeah.
they were slated to make like 4 of those movies because the books were so popular, they
Right.
made the one. And they
Yeah.
canceled the other movies because the general public, for whatever reason,
Right.
just didn't catch on.
Now, in closing, I just want to backdraft off of the big man statement. Nobody cared about the sci-fi universe Golden Compass, but Fast and Furious has made 10 movies. Okay, every single last one of them grossed $1 billion. Okay, so
You're right.
when it comes to universes, all right.
Yeah.
We're going to jump into this next thing, but before we do that, I want to let you know Market Explainer has a Patreon. We are adding new and different content there all the time. The full video is always available for free without ads, at least our ads on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Market Explainer, and you can go to marketexplainer.com and learn a little bit more about all of our other jazz. All right, so this next story, Kmart.
Attention, Kmart shoppers.
Right. So all of the references that he's going to make to Kmart, because weren't you a manager to Kmart? Is that correct?
I was an assistant manager to Kmart. I was also a pharmacy technician. I
Okay.
actually met my wife's grandmother before I ever met what would become my wife.
Yeah.
Years before in
Right.
the Kmart that I worked at. Wonderful lady, right?
And didn't you
Built
say that
prescriptions for me.
Mary? Yeah. Didn't you say Mary Kay? Mary Kay Letourneau is different. I'm saying Mary Kay of Mary Kay Cosmetics. Didn't she used to come into the Kmart pharmacy where you worked?
No, that was Walgreens. That was after
Okay.
Kmart. Kmart
Okay.
was my first big job outside of bagging groceries. Like it was my first, like I went from bagging groceries to Kmart as a cashier, right? Stock boy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then moved up the ranks from there. But look,
Should we really
Kmart
say that it was a big job? Is that what we should say?
at the time it was. I mean, you're talking
Okay.
about early 90s, right? So at
Yeah.
the time in the early 90s, Kmart was thousands of stores across America. Kmart
Right.
was Walmart before Walmart was Walmart, right?
Right.
You went to Kmart for everything. If it wasn't at your local grocery store, your
Yeah,
Bob's,
Kmart.
and again, I grew up
Yeah.
in the country, right?
Yeah.
So if it wasn't at Bob's grocery store or Minyard's grocery store, or whatever local grocery store you go to, you went to the closest Kmart. Right?
Right.
Because they
Okay.
had everything else. They were
Right.
they were the first, or one of the first, especially in the South, big box stores like
Right.
a Walmart before Walmart. They didn't used to carry food, and then they tried to get into that in the 90s because you had places like your Walmarts and other places started
And,
to
yeah,
add
the-
food and stuff like that.
Right.
They made the of course, attention Kmart shoppers became a whole. It's in movies like Beetlejuice, right? He comes
Okay.
up and says, well, attention Kmart shoppers.
So, this
Go ahead.
story is a example of the difference between a Gen Xer and a millennial. I don't know what the heck this guy's talking about.
Well, but-
I've been into a Kmart. That's not true. I've been into a Kmart probably 10 or 15 times in my life. And I remember the last one that was in not the town where I grew up, but the town where my high school was, because I went to high school one town over. They had a Kmart, and that was kind of the place like you could go in the back of the Kmart and like to the behind the Kmart.
Yeah.
That's a place where you did less than honorable transactions with people in the alternative economy, and nobody would. But if you go to the back of the Walmart and do
Hey.
that, they're stocking and there's trucks coming.
when
There's-
the Kmart was first around, that was a really nice neighborhood, right? Like
Yeah,
when
that's
the
true.
Kmart was at its
That's
peak,
true.
that neighborhood
Yeah.
was a really nice neighborhood.
Oh,
and when you
100%.
were growing up, it was not, right?
Yes.
Because the Kmart didn't move. So look, a lot of things have led to the Kmart downfall, but it was very pop culture in the 90s. Rain Man, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man,
Yeah.
I got to go to Kmart, got to buy underwear, got to go to
Yeah.
Kmart, got to buy. I mean, it made it into movies and stuff
Right.
like that. The blue light special thing, you're probably not old enough. Actually, I'm 100% you're not old enough to actually remember. Blue light specials were these things. You can probably still see the old commercials, but they used to literally, as a way to get people in the store in the middle of the day in the 80s and early 90s, they came up with what's called the blue light special. It could come out at any time during the day, and it was for like an hour. And they would announce it over the intercom, so it wasn't on radio, it wasn't on TV or whatever. If you happened to be in the store, they had this cart with a big blue light on the top, and they would go to a certain section of the store, and they would be like, all right, these items on this aisle are 80% off. Like, I mean, something insane, right? But only for the next hour. And it was, the light would go off, and it would just... almost the whole store could see this blue light going off and where it was, and people would just flock to that, and it was a way to get people in the store in off times, right?
Yeah, so like if they had that if Kmart was still a factor today, and they're saying that there's one in New Jersey, it's about to close, and then there's only going to be 3 Kmarts in the country.
Right.
If that was still operating today, here's how Gary Vee would react to it. All right, guys, what you need to do is you need to stake out the Kmart. You need to wait for the blue light special. You need to buy out all of the shelves, and then you're going to put it on Amazon, and you're going to make 100,000. That's Gary. And I love Gary.
100%. That would be Gary Vee's tip for a week if this still existed. 100%.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
So, the reason this is interesting to me is we have this belief, or there's a belief. If if you're on social media, people talk about these mega corporations. They exist forever and ever. It's like, no. Here's Kmart, who was, like you said, Walmart before Walmart. They pioneered big box retail. They literally invented a flipping category, and they're dead.
Mm-hmm.
IBM.
Well, they invented more than that. They invented layaway.
Yeah.
Before everybody could have a credit card, they invented layaway, where you could put something on save and pay for it out over, I forget how many weeks, or 10 weeks or 20 weeks, or however many it was. They invented that as literally a way for people to buy higher priced items. You know what I mean? For your average family and kind of stuff. That they started a lot of what we now consider normal. Right? That Target picked off of, Walmart picked off of, or whatever. And like a lot of companies, because Kmart eventually was bought by Sears.
Right. No, all the way around. Kmart bought Sears.
I'm sorry, you're right.
Yeah.
And so they combined as a company, and then both died as a company as well. Right? So, because they both suffered from the same problem.
Right.
They thought, like Blockbuster, what we do is so good it'll last forever.
Right.
And it didn't.
Right. And I still remember it was maybe 10 years ago now, there was a Kmart commercial on one of the Super Bowls. It was called the Ship My Pants commercial. And obviously, you know what they're alluding to and they're trying to say.
Right.
It's a hilarious commercial. To this day, still some of the best television marketing I've ever seen. That's my opinion. It's well done, all this other stuff. But here's the problem. I don't care. Right?
Well, but by then there was no Kmart around you. But by then they closed so many stores that by that time, and again, look, the first time they filed for bankruptcy was 2002, 20 years ago. They've limped from bankruptcy to being dead for 20 years. And during that 20 years, less and less stores. Every time they tried to revive it.
Yeah, so let me ask you this question. If you're Kmart, why aren't you just going, all right, let's just die? What are we doing this for? Like, it's kind of like if, and I know somebody kind of in this situation where it's like, well, your diabetes and everything else is so bad. We can keep treating you, but we're going to have to take a bunch of your limbs. It's like, all right, let's just stop all the treatment. Let's go to the old country buffet and let's just call it. It's like, what are we doing here? Right. So my question is, why don't they do that?
You're talking from a business standpoint, and I'm going to make a non-business thought process. When you close stores, you lay off employees.
Yeah.
You now have a place that neighborhood no longer has access to for
Right.
food, for milk, for clothes, for whatever. You are lowering the amount of competition in a given area for retail.
Sure.
All of these dominoes that fall when you close a big store. Now you could also make the argument that, hey, every time they had to close 200 stores at a time, didn't that do that anyway?
Right.
But there's a reason that there's these 3 stores are the 3 stores left over, right?
Isn't it going to be the case that those people are going to go work at the Dollar Tree, and the Dollar Tree is going to eat up a little bit of Kmart's market, and Walmart's going to eat up a little bit of Kmart's old market? I still remember there was a huge deal, like the Kmart in downtown Minneapolis. This is a little bit before my time, but my dad used to work in downtown Minneapolis and used to tell me, like, there is a Kmart that they had to build a highway around because the Kmart just refused to close. And I think it was in the last 5 years that this Kmart finally closed, and they were able to just railroad right down it like they've been trying to do for 25 years. And there's a lot of things to think about here, but one of the things is this concept that in market economics, that all that happens is oligarchs just get rich and they're rich forever, is like, no. Kmart was out there. It's dead now. There are children born today complaining about workers' rights and all this other stuff that I think is stupid, that don't know that this company existed and went out of business before you were born. But your parents and grandparents went to a place that you can never go to because it just went out of business. And between Amazon, it's interesting though, is like Sears was the original Amazon, right?
Yeah.
It was a catalog that had everything in it, and they shipped it to your house. You could buy a kit home, a kit car. You could buy literally soup to nuts from Sears catalog. And you told me once you and your brothers in the early 1900s ordered a car from there, and your brother takes his belt off and put it, and then you crank it in the front. It's not that old.
Look, no. But the point is and Sears became a cornerstone for every mall in America, right? An anchor for every mall in America. People, tools and stuff. Again, but when you think about one of the things, and I like about this story, is they interviewed a couple of people from like where these stores were dying and closing down and stuff, and that same nostalgia kept coming back. Kmart was an icon of that from the 60s all the way through the 90s. It was an icon because it was the first of what it was doing. Going to Kmart they were clean, they were well lit, they were they had pharmacies in them, which was a new thing. So everybody could get their prescriptions. So it became part of the community. It was a very nostalgic. I remember all of us going to go ahead.
No, I was going to say, before Kmart had a pharmacy in every town, how could you get your fentanyl, right? It's extremely hard to get hooked on opioids if your pharmacy doesn't carry opioids. So,
Well, but I remember Kmart was the first big store that I remember as a kid, my parents taking us to go Christmas shopping for the whole family, right? Where you give a kid's money and then you just split up around the store and you're all hiding your cart when you see one of your brothers or sisters or whatever. Like Kmart was that store that we would go to, and my dad would be like, all right, here's $50 you need to buy for your brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? Your mom something or whatever. And you just go out, and that's what kind of place it was. I was actually 3 years in a row the Kmart Santa Claus.
That's about right. You're anatomically sized correctly for that. It's just...
And always have been. So, which was a whole experience for me that I didn't, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, as a side note, did you know that I do ethnically diverse Santa Claus every year? And I charge $1,000 a party. Yeah. And instead of ho, 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 I say, oh, oh, oh. Yeah.
So, look, when it comes down, you're right. The company should just die at this point. It should have done it. I mean, I think it's filed for bankruptcy at least 2, but maybe 3 times in totality. But as long as someone's still making money, they're going to keep it alive. It's going to zombify. Right.
So here's the other thing. When these Kmarts, as a real estate guy, when these Kmarts have gone out of business, I remember listening to a podcast where a guy's like, the city was just so... like, what do we do with this? It was the mega Kmart or the biggest Kmart. Mm-hmm. He bought it for nothing, turned it into a storage facility, and made a mint on it. So as an entrepreneur, as a real estate guy and an entrepreneur, I'm looking at all of these big box retailers that are going to die and go, hey, I can buy this and turn it into a thing. So,
well, I mean, Circuit City went through this very same thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Fry's just went through it last year.
Yep,
You and I did a podcast about it. So these very successful big box companies that at one point were top of the world, right?
Yeah.
Didn't change with the environment for whatever reason.
Yep.
And a lot of it. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say this one kind of parting phrase that I think of. Nothing new under the sun. Nothing lasts forever. It's kind of weird, right? We're all just recycling someone else's old genes. That's all we're doing.
Well, but I think change comes in. The older I get, the more I believe in that change is the only thing constant. And if you're not changing and evolving and learning, you will eventually fall down this hole, right?
Hey, man, if you reject change, you've rejected life itself. Like, you've accepted, I'm just going to die now. I'm just going to curl up in a ball and die because change is all there is, and adapting is all there is. And if you look at the kind of slate of Silicon Valley unicorn startups that happened in my youth, the Ubers and Amazons, they have this policy of like, we're going to go disrupt ourselves. And that's an interesting concept. And, because they looked at all the old dinosaurs and said, hey, these people didn't adapt enough. And you look at some of these companies and you go, I think you disrupted yourself out of business.
And that can be true too. I mean, anything in excess is a bad thing, right? So you can definitely change too often as well. Right. And that's the hard part, is finding that middle ground. Who are you listening to? Why are you listening to them? And what are you doing about it? All of those can be overcompensated for in one way or the other. And that's what we call life and business and entrepreneurship, folks. I mean, that's the reality, is finding what that really is.
Right. All right. You want to jump into this next one? You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you about Avenue Lucky. Avenue Lucky is my agency that develops websites and provides done-for-you marketing services. You can go to avenuelucky.com, learn all about it there. So this next story is inflation. It continues to happen. And I've seen some TikToks and some Instagram Reels and some other things about the subject that make me go, isn't this what happens when people are stupid? So one of the tweets is from this guy named Dan Price, and Dan Price and Robert Reich, or whatever the guy's name is. And they're like, this is not inflation. This is greed on the part of corporations charging more money. And they cite as a source.
That is partially true. Go ahead.
It's not partially true. It's totally incorrect. But they cite as a source, look at how all these corporations have higher profits. And my thing is, well, listen, when inflation takes place, here's what happens. You have $1. Now $1 buys 80 cents worth of stuff. So in order to buy $1 worth of stuff, you have to buy $1. It costs $1.20. Mm-hmm. It's a basic. I literally saw someone a girl put up a TikTok, and it's surrounding the subject of modern monetary theory. And it simply says, we can print money and the value won't go down if we say it doesn't go down. And here's my thing. Value is subjective, number one. And number two, this isn't like Harry Potter's Wizarding World, okay? This isn't magic, all right? If you have more of a thing, it's just less valuable. It's just the way it goes, okay? Sometimes it can inflate a market in a micro sense. NFTs are that way right now. We feel like they're not going to be worth more. I think we were talking about this in the pre-show, like Twitter, the first tweet Jack Dorsey ever sent sold for $2.something million. They put it up for $48 million. Couldn't get over $1,000 in bits. So what I'm relating that to say, like, value subjective, and you can't just say, like, because when he did it, it was NFT.
Okay, this is one of those. You can normally make the argument that value is subjective. Yes. Not in this. This is not subjective. No, it's not.
Well, I mean, are you saying that
it is subjective on anything from the primary market? Okay?
Okay.
If I buy a gallon of milk for $1 and I want to sell it for $3, that's subjective. But going to the store and buying $1 of gallon of milk like everybody else in the grocery store sells it for $1 is not subjective.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the dollar's value will go down because there's more of them.
Well, and that's where the good old-fashioned look, economics boils down to the same thing it always does. One truth of economics, supply and demand. As supply goes up and demand goes up, the price goes up. Right? Or supply goes down, one goes up, one goes down, right?
Right.
It's the balance of the world. My point is this inflation, which in simplest terms, I know Danny said 20%, 80%, all of these. In simplest terms,
I didn't say 80%. I said 20.
Well, I'm just saying, if a dollar was 80%, you threw out a lot of numbers. In simplest terms, inflation is if you paid $1 last year for a gallon of milk, and that same gallon of milk this year was $1.10, that's inflation. You're buying the same gallon, it's just 10 cents more expensive, right?
Yeah.
Now, you also combine that with how people are getting paid, how much money people have to buy that. Now, the reality and what's causing this big stir, the inflation is not the only conversation as part of this. Right. It also has to do with people and money and pay rates and all this stuff. Because the fact is what 8.5% inflation means to you, right, as an individual, means that unless you got a 9% raise this year, like if you're making 9% more in 2022 than you did in 2021, you are actually losing money in comparison to last year.
So I'm going to say some pseudo-political stuff now. We're just all going to have to gird our loins and live with it. I am a huge fan and have been a huge follower of Ron Paul for the longest time. And he's always said, if you have fiat currency where there's nothing that backs it, then the government can just print money willy-nilly, which it did in 2020 and 2021. And the consequence is that the value of your dollar, you can buy less and less with the dollar, and wages will never, ever, ever keep pace with the inflation. So it's simply the case that a company is now paying, and listen, there's something else to factor in here. There's a shortage of goods because of manufacturing slowdowns and shutdowns and shipping shutdowns and slowdowns. So that factors into this a bit. And some economists are saying 8.5%. Other economists that I follow more closely will say if you use certain calculators that were more popular in the 80s, because some of the way they calculate inflation is, well, we're not going to include bread, milk, cheese, gasoline, all of this stuff. Well, we don't include that as inflationary because that's whatever, which is stupid.
Okay, so you have
then it's 8.5%. Yeah.
You have two categories. You have the consumer price index, right? Which includes things like, your household electricity bill, your gas bill, whatever, right? And then you have what's called the CPI in line, which eliminates your food and energy, right? Yeah, so it's much more simplified, right? Yeah, and inflation, when you take out food and energy, is a little less, right? I think it's 7.
Whatever,
I think it was 5.6. I'm sorry. So 5.6 versus 8.5. Right. So you go, okay, what's really driving the bigger portion of it is obviously energy and food, right?
Right.
That when you talk about supply and demand, we sell X numbers of gallons of milk in America every day, right?
Right.
And when you know that supply line has been disrupted by a Panini, by truck drivers, and by a whole bunch of stuff, you mess with the supply, the demand goes up, the price goes up, right?
And this is already, I'm seeing this like, I had to go to a couple grocery stores to get everything that I wanted because not everybody had.
And then when you do, you pay more for them. But here's the deal. Here's where Danny and I agree, because look, I'm telling you facts, right? What I've said so far are just facts of 8.5 in the last 12 months.
And I'm
where
just
Danny and I differ is Danny doesn't think that Danny is a true to life anarcho-capitalist.
Yes.
Even though the anarchy side of Danny's brain doesn't make any sense. But let's just say, from the capitalist standpoint, that Danny believes that if you can make $1.50 off of a gallon of milk when everybody else is charging $1, good for you. You just made 50 cents more. Where I don't believe that should be necessarily true. What Danny said at the beginning of this story was Congress is getting on to companies about being greedy during a pandemic to get more money. That is reality. There's not you can't even untie that knot that it's not true. Now you can argue whether it's right or wrong, but it's the truth. The fact is they've used the panini and supply chain issues to keep prices high or make them higher.
Well,
when their cost of the product is not changing.
Well, that's the thing is, do we know that their cost of the product isn't changing? Because what I will tell you is, I know that truck drivers, so many of whom got off the road because the industry had just gotten so overregulated and complicated. A lot of these truck drivers don't even run into California. They had to raise the price for runs into California and New York. Hey, port cities of this country, right? Where California changed its legislation. So it created the dock workers are now making fortunes more than they were making. And so the interesting thing is the group of people who are like workers' rights and people need to make more money and blue collar workers need to make a fortune. Great. The consequence of that is higher priced goods. And
of course,
these characters that are saying, well, you cannot tell me that if you look at a country like Venezuela that print money willy-nilly, right? Whose prices, like what is the value of the Venezuelan bolivar? You have to go to an Instagram account every morning and check what it's going for. So you can know what things cost because that is how rapid the inflation is. Well, that is a lesson in modern monetary theory, which is if we just say they think it's magic, right? They think this isn't a science, it's magic, right? That the value is assigned by the top people. And if we just become the top people and we control everything, and the reality is this is a failure of the central banking system. And people like me who are critical of that system say, hey, listen, crypto is imperfect. It's distributed, but it's imperfect.
It's not going to happen. Stop trying to make it happen.
That's fine.
Crypto is never going to be the universal currency. It's not even going to be the one country that we did a video about.
El Salvador.
I forget which country that made it as a cryptocurrency. The business companies, the business people in that country are literally currently lobbying to try and get it ousted because it's costing them a fortune.
Yeah.
But I digress. The point is.
But what I was trying to say though is like, this concept that it lives out there in the ether. These have already been proven to not work, and they're scientifically incorrect. Right? There is no gravity. The Earth is flat. This is flat Earth economics. Right?
No.
Yes, it is.
Your side is flat Earth economics.
No,
current economics is. Danny's point is he's saying that the government put too much money out into America. And by doing so, that is one of the theories behind inflation, is when the market is hot, people are spending money because they have, quote unquote, too much money, right? That is one of the things inflate. Now what I'm saying though is I don't think that this is caused, that's where we differ. I don't think that this is caused, maybe a little bit, but again, when you talk about your average American still doesn't have $1,000 in the bank,
right?
You're not talking about. There's still not. The government didn't give out enough money to make the average American get more than $1,000 in their bank.
Correct.
So it's not necessarily that.
So
and you say, how do we know they're making more money? The companies is because of profits. They're all publicly traded. Right. They're all. If you sold 1,000 gallons of milk last year, and I just keep using that analogy to keep it simple.
Right.
If I sold 1,000 gallons of milk last year and made $1,000, and I sell 1,000 gallons of milk this year and made $3,000. It doesn't matter if my product price went up because I made $3,000.
Well, no. So what I'm saying is and this is part of why this feels like hocus pocus, is because what I'm saying is it took you $1 the value of the dollar went down, so your purchasing power went down with it. And when your purchasing power goes down, the cost of goods, the number goes up, but the value of that thing hasn't really changed. It's just that the number changed and the number's higher. And that is the consequence of printing Some reports are saying they printed $8 trillion, not just $4.
It doesn't matter how much money they printed.
Yeah.
Again, if
it doesn't matter.
Profits didn't outweigh.
Yeah. So we're talking in circles at this point, but it's fine.
Right.
But I'm just saying,
how the government combats this. There's only one way for the Fed to combat this, and
that's
increase interest rates, right?
Yeah.
Which is a tax on you in a completely different way, right? Correct. Your credit card interest rates go up, the price of you buying a home. For example, at one point, at the beginning of this year, January into February, you could get a home loan, 30-year home loan, anywhere between 2.5 to 3.25.
3 points,
right?
Yeah.
Okay, so as of a week ago, the interest rates one day last week popped up above 5%.
Yeah.
That's a 2.5 point swing.
Yeah.
In 3 months.
Right. And here's the thing. I always like to point this out. People, when we watched The Dark Knight, the film, the fantastic Christopher Nolan Batman film, no one ever gave credit to the Joker for piling up all that money and burning it. But he was really just anti-inflation, right? He was doing his part to combat inflation.
That's what he was doing. See, I knew there was a reason. I just didn't know. But
he said it was about sending a message, and this is the message. We are against printing money.
If you want to know how bad how bad it can be, inflation can be scary for an economy.
Yeah.
And how bad the Fed will combat it. Go ask your pop, your grandpa, right? Yeah. Old pappy, whatever you want. Ask him what his first home loan interest rate was.
Right.
Okay? Because this is not the first time in this country we've seen stuff like this. We are currently setting records that date back to the late 70s and early 80s, which is the last time it happened very well. And people that weren't alive back then don't remember that the Fed was so anxious to get it down that interest rates to buy a home in the early 80s were between 15 and 25%.
Right. And so, and listen, this is another criticism that I hear from people, which is like, well, when my parents bought a house, the interest rate was, or they bought a house for $60,000, and now that same house is worth, $350,000. How am I expected to be able to afford it? I was like, well, your parents made $20,000 collectively, and the interest on their house was 20%.
Yeah.
So, and you're not factoring all that stuff in. The criticism I'm trying to levy here is that people who say we can just print money and there's no consequences then complain about the consequences, not realizing that we have spent decades printing money with low interest rates and giving that money out, and that has not created the equality in the economy where people own homes and all this other dumb stuff that people think is important. We haven't created that by printing money. Now, and I'm going to say something political here, is I'm not a huge fan of Jimmy Carter, but Carter always is kind of like he's this idiot and he was a terrible president. But a lot of what Carter did actually, which kind of blended into Reagan's era, he appointed this Volcker to the Federal Reserve, and he's the guy who jacked interest rates to the moon. And those extremely high interest rates corrected and made the dollar very strong and created all of the prosperity that, people refer to as Reaganomics, but really is like ultimately downstream what was Bill Clinton's era of government, which was like, so
climbing out of a recession that those interest rates caused. That's what they're trying to avoid this time around. They don't want to spike in Fed rates and stuff like that, because they don't want to send us into what became the mid 80s, which was a recession. Right. So they don't want to send us into a recession. Right, they just need everything to level off. They need everything to slow down a little bit.
And so it's I'll use this example. If you've ever seen the movie, I can't remember. Pilot. It's the one where the guy's the pilot and he like turns the plane upside down. I can't remember.
Oh, wasn't that based on a real story? It had Denzel Washington, I think.
Yes,
played the pilot, but I think it was based on a real story.
Okay, well, either way. Denzel Washington has an alcohol problem in the film. His character has an alcohol problem. And the night before his review board, they do all this stuff to get him dried out, and he's cleaned up, he's sober, but he goes into the hotel room that, the door's connected and it's open, and someone has already taken everything out of the bar in his room. He gets into the bar and he's wasted. So they come to get him there. His union rep, an attorney or whatever are there, and they go, "What do we do?" He has to testify before the review board, the FAA or whatever the review board, the NTSB, whatever it is. And he goes, "You need to call my Coke dealer to level me out." So that's what, because like he's clearly intoxicated, but the Coke brings him back. So that's what we're doing right now. We've been on an alcohol fuel binged. We've binged on booze for 2 or 3 years. Our liver's about to give out, and we're like, we got to level this thing out. Get me some Coke. So he's just bumping rails with John Goodman in a hotel room.
See, I want to agree with you, because that is one of the ways that inflation happens, and I'm not saying that's not part of a bigger piece of the puzzle. My issue would be, I would come more likely to believe that as a quote-unquote driving force if people had more money in their bank accounts. Well, if your average person came out the other end better. Right,
yeah. So, and here's why I disagree with that. Free economics, people like Peter Schiff and Milton Friedman and stuff will tell you that this kind of activity, the kind of stuff the Fed has done, and this is not that they just came up with this theory 2 years ago. This has been the established way of thinking, that the wages will never keep pace with it, because the inflation goes like this and wages go like this. That's just, and they're scientists talking about a science, and they're telling you how things work. And let me just say this.
You combine that with companies making record profits. Well, companies, if a company, okay, let's just say, for example, in the last year,
so what I'm saying is those record profits are a non-metric. They don't factor into this the way people are saying.
But they have to, because that means to me the company's not carrying their end. And you could make the argument as a company, if you own stock in a company and they're a publicly traded company, that's their job, is a company's job, is to protect your profits, which make your dividends or your stock price rise. I get that, but here's the point. And when you get into people, this is why I get leftist when it comes to people, right? Is when it comes to people and you go, okay, the inflation for the last 12 months is 8.5%. That's just a fact. That's what it is. Yeah. That means that if you didn't get an 8.5% raise, your money doesn't go as far.
Right.
In a company that, instead of giving you a 2% raise when they know inflation was 8.5%, if they gave you that 9% raise, right, which gets you over, okay, you didn't grow a lot, but you grew some, right? You would still be making record profits. That's where the working man comes in and goes, you could share with who makes your product, the employee.
Right.
And you could still show record profits.
Right. And so,
but you're choosing to show even more record profits and screw me, the working guy.
Right. And you know what is interesting is, I think, I read this in this, I don't remember where I read it, but it felt like a credible source at the time. Each congressional office, or not congressional office, sorry, each committee, their budget has been bumped by 22% automatic. So that means that the government is recognizing
inflation.
They're recognizing inflation, but they're treating it with a different number. So the other problem is, hey, in order to go get a worker now, I'm in a situation where the house I'm living in right now is up for sale. So I'm not cooking as much in there. So I'm going to Chipotle every day because it's organic and whatever, blah, blah, blah. In the last week, I've gone into Chipotle. They've had no staff. They've closed. Like, we're talking 6 p.m. They're closed. They have no supply. I walk in there and they go, hey, sorry, we're out of steak, barbacoa, chicken, all of the food, ingredients I usually want in my burrito. And you go, so
then on top of that, if you did find what you want to order, it's more expensive. That's my point entirely, right?
Right.
Companies are choosing that.
Right, and that's the cause of inflation. Inflation says, in order to get a thing that was $10 last year, you need to spend $15 this year. And that's companies. Several of these companies have said, our costs have gone up more than 15%, but we're only charging the consumer 3 or 4 to 5 or 6%.
Yeah, but that's short term. See, that's good old fun fashion company speak. They do it in the housing market, building houses all the time. Oh, right. Last spring the price of wood has gone up 300%. I'm not charging you 300% for more for that house, but when you average it over the last the last 10 years, they're paying less than, you know what I mean? It's all an average for them, but they use headlines as corporations, and again, good on them. It's just good PR. They use certain headlines to their advantage, right? To make themselves they're in the muck with you. They're in the victim with you, right? Well, we're all at the behest of the ships sitting at the port in California, or what?
Well, and so I'm just saying is, we have to factor that in and go, hey, the ports in California have changed their operating mandates or whatever, and they've said workers have to get paid exorbitant money, or workers they can't work a lot of shifts. Well, you can't unload. The backlog of ships sitting on the port in California, you have to account for that and part of it too is when you hollow out your economy and you don't make anything here and you rely on stuff to get shipped somewhere else, that's a problem, right?
Well, but the argument on the labor side of it, and I'm not a big union guy, but the part of it on the labor side of it is, let's say you're Chipotle, for example, right?
Right.
You go, well, if Chipotle would just continue to increase their wages until they found a staff that was willing to deal with it, right? And then charge if they can't pay a staff to keep staffed, and still make your Chipotle burritos for a price that you're willing to pay, then a lot of people argue then it's not a viable business.
And I'll make the argument that the people who were working there for $16 an hour and go, I don't want to do this anymore, they're not going to Wendy's. Like, where are you going? What are you doing with your life? How do you pay your rent?
They're living with their Gen X and Boomer parents. That's what they're doing.
Right.
So that's the point, right? So that again.
That stops being.
I'm not picking on millennials.
Me neither.
Okay, I'm not picking on millennials, but millennials are acting according to the safety net they have. Okay. You could only quit that job making $12 or $13 or $16 an hour doing something you don't want to do if you have someone to fall back on.
And by
Generation
the way,
X, the baby boomers, did not have that option. When you lost a job, your family wasn't going to eat.
Right. And let me just put it this way too. I know kids getting their first job right now at 15 or 16 at McDonald's getting $17 an hour. I've worked corporate jobs for less money with a bachelor's degree. I'm not complaining. I'm saying good for them, but I'm simply saying that I don't know how much. Again, so Big Man and I are saying two different things here. I'm saying that they're not being greedy. It's just that everything is costing them more too. And so
I think it's greedy too.
Okay,
I think it's
greedy
too. I think it's a combination of all of it, and it typically is. There's an algorithm that some bean counter, right?
Right.
There are people, some like Walmart and everybody else, have a whole bunch of bean counters in a room going, hey, if we raise this 2 cents and take this other one minus 1 cent, we're going to get an extra cent on every of this more sold item. And then we can say we didn't raise prices because we offset it over here, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of people figuring out that, and it's probably both of what Danny and I both said. There's probably, there's too much money in this demographics, and it's just going to affect everybody. You know what I mean? And middle class usually gets that algorithm. It's either, if it doesn't affect the middle class, well, it's going to screw over the poor. Well, no, it doesn't affect the middle class, so... so it's an algorithm of a bunch of these different things. Right.
And so, and just in parting, let me just say this much. The poor are the people who need the dollar to hold its value the most. And since the United States got off the gold standard with Nixon, the dollar has lost over 90% of its value. And these are scientific facts that you can look up. I'm just saying. Mathematical, scientific facts that you can just look up, and there's no contradictory explanation. And it's on some level, to the layman, the non-economist, the non-scientist, this feels like hocus pocus magic. And that's why a lot of the dialogue, even from CEOs, even from a former advisor to the president, like Robert, whatever the guy's name is, you hear the dumbest, idiotic things saying, it's corporate, they're just raising money. Now, if I hear a guy at a bar say that who doesn't know what he's talking about, who packs UPS trucks for a living, whatever. Now, if I hear that from somebody who should know better, idiot. That's all.
It's part of the equation. Anyway, what's our last story? Let's get to our last story there, Danny.
All right. Before we do that, as you always know, our show is brought to you by Big Man Gear. BigManGear.com is printed and delivered by Amazon. You can go to BigManGear.com, see what kind of stuff the Big Man offers, and pick some out, and they will ship it to you. All right.
Let's get to your non-story story.
Now, I personally have had a less than complimentary thought when it comes to autonomous and self-driving cars, because I believe in my lifetime there will be a push to make it illegal for people to drive their own cars. Because, and here's me being as the Big Man would say, conspiracy theorist, or as the last 5 years have proven, simply factual all the time person, that they're just going to say you're not allowed to drive a car, and then when you tweet something inappropriate and you try to get in your car, they're just going to be like, yeah, denied, delete your tweet, you can get in the car. So
no, they're not taking away. Look, they're not taking away our driver's licenses. They're not ever going to say you can't drive. That's not going to happen. Probably not in my lifetime. I'm not saying not ever, because at some point there'll be just like in what's the movie with Will Smith, the iRobot, right? Just like in iRobots, at some point it'll be much safer for the computer to drive than these idiots. Okay,
and that's fine. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Some people just got to die for my freedom. That's all I'm saying.
But so,
and if it's a person that rides one of those low seat bicycles, I forget what it's called,
recumbent bicycle.
Recumbent bicycle on the street, like you're just going down West Palmer on your recumbent bicycle, when there's a freaking bike lane that I paid for, by the way, you ding dong. My tax dollars, when I fill up gas in my V8 Lincoln Town Car or my Expedition, I'm the one building you a bike lane, and you're in the main road and you're not following the signal because you're like, it's too hard to go uphill. Get a car. Okay?
We need you out of the gene pool anyway. That's all I'm saying about that. But look, I have really, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, I don't share Danny's fear about that. I don't care. As long as they don't run into me, as long as they're not killing people, I could care less whether autonomous vehicles exist or don't exist. Doesn't bother me whatsoever.
Right.
But look, we all have done story after story the last couple of years. There are several cities in lots of different places that are currently running trials of autonomous vehicles, right? Yep. They do them in these big cities because that's where you get the most data, right?
Correct.
You put them in San Francisco, you put them in LA, you put them in New York City, you put them in Dallas, places where they're tested because they're going to work in podunk nowhere, Georgia, because there's nothing to hit. Okay?
Right. True.
Right, where you can get a lot of data in these kind of places. This car, here's the reason I say this is a non-story story, and Danny loves non-story stories.
I do.
Is this car did exactly what a human being should do.
Which is got pulled over and said, screw you, and drove off.
No, it's not. It got pulled over at a red light.
Yeah.
And when the light turned green, it pulled past the green light and pulled over, which is what you're supposed to do so you don't block an intersection. Now, when this all went viral because somebody just happened to take a video of this actually happening, and from the perspective of the guy standing on the side of the street, what happens? Cops get out, look, see there's no driver in the car, right? And people are freaking out because, people pull out their phones because, wait a minute, a car with no driver and it's getting pulled over by the cops. That's funny all in itself, right? And then to see the cops still standing beside the car and for it to just take off.
Yeah, because what else can you do?
And then it stops again, and then here comes the cops pulling up behind it again, right? And then it stays there and shuts itself off. the part I watched the whole video because I wanted to see what actually happened versus what this article went through. And was like, oh, this autonomous car ran from the cops. No,
Yeah.
it didn't. It did the proper traffic thing, but it weirded the cops out, obviously. But
Right.
then it made me ask the question, what are cops supposed to do with a car that has a bad taillight or didn't use its blinker or is going too fast or too slow or whatever? What are they supposed to do to an autonomous vehicle car? So I actually went and found.
I'm watching the video right now. It's hilarious.
Yeah. I watched the so I went and found Waymo and Cruise's videos of what cops, firefighters, EMS, what they're supposed to do when they pull over one of these cars. They essentially have to call. They got to call. The funniest thing is I'm sitting here watching this training video that is meant for EMS and fire, whatever, right? Because they just put it down on YouTube in today's world, right?
Yeah.
I'm sitting here watching it and I'm like, have we not made progress on TV shows and movies and instructional things since 1980? Why is this still, I keep waiting for it to in the VCR where you get that little shh go up and down. I keep waiting for it. Can we not make an educational video in 2022 that is that's not less than when you have come into contact with the worst actor in the world. I am. Yes, my parents are very disappointed in me. But anyway, they're supposed to call, but that's the thing. It's they have to call.
Now let me tell you something.
They have to call. The cops has to call and say, "Hey, your vehicle's acting like a crazy." So if it's driving through a Wendy's, I can't do anything about it.
Let me tell you something. Here's what I loved about this story. Now the cops got to sit on customer service. Hey, when my house got broken into and you said you'd be there in 45 minutes and it took you 3 hours, now we're all in the same boat, pal. Thanks.
Well, but I mean, think about that time. Okay, so if again, extreme case, I got an autonomous car just ramming itself into a Wendy's wall, right? Cops show up because that number, I didn't know what that number existed.
Of course
I didn't know what was supposed to happen. So now I'm sitting in the Wendy's parking lot eating my Baconator, right?
Yeah.
And I see this autonomous car. It's just headbutting itself into the side of the Wendy's. Bam.
Well,
bam,
let me tell you something.
Bam. Right.
You know, one of my
I have to wait on the cops.
Yeah. One of my tip of the weeks several months ago was, with enough velocity, any restaurant can be a drive-through. Right.
Well,
and so this autonomous car is just.
It's giving that Wendy's a drive-through. That's what its point is, right? And it's ramming into the side. So I call the cops, right? Now, depending on where I live, the cop's going to get there anywhere from 2 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on where I live, and it's slamming in its. So I've got to watch this car slam into this wall for 20 minutes, right? And then the cops get there, and hopefully the cops in Joe Bob County, whatever, aren't trying to Google what the hell do I do with a Wayfair car.
That's right, Waymo. Yeah.
What do I do with this car because they didn't watch the educational video?
Yeah, because Wayfair is that company that sells home goods, but also probably does human trafficking.
Cruise, Waymo. Let me know what the name of the car when they actually start being a car company, and then I'll learn it. All right. Okay. I wouldn't have been able to know what Uber was until Uber became Uber. I'd have been like,
fair enough.
Car company that picks you up and takes you places.
Yeah, listen, I just thought this was a funny story because the car drove off and it did what every person wants to do when they get pulled over, which is go, I guess I'm going on a high-speed chase. Call me O.J. Simpson.
Well, that's the point. It's not like it would be fine if it was the cops pulled up and it just drove a little while and then pulled over. We've all done that, right?
Right.
Or if it drove, if it was already rolling and the cops pulled up behind it and then it went a little bit and pulled over. No, all of those would have been fine. But the fact that you see the cops have the time, it stops long enough for the cops to get out of their car, walk up to realize that there's not a driver in it. When you got people all around and going, there ain't nobody in there. Like you hear it on the tank, like, ain't nobody in there. You know what I mean? Like,
I think it'd be funnier if the window, I think it'd be funnier if the window rolled down and it just Bluetooth to like an OnStar type service, and like autonomous vehicle headquarters. How can I help you?
Oh no, it would be something like, because they're all named. Like when you get in, like the taxi thing, they're like, your car's name is Ken, right?
Yeah.
Hello, welcome to Ken. How can I help you?
All right. Well, I think that concludes that. I'm gonna do tip of the week. You ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Just remember, if it says punishable by fine, it just means legal for a price.
God help us all. We'll see you next time, folks.